The sea breathed and hissed beneath Dragonstone, rising and falling in long black swells that shattered white upon the basalt fangs at the foot of the cliff. In the stone drum, where walls were thicker than a man was tall and carved into the likeness of great scaled beasts, a fire smoldered in a brazier of hammered iron. The painted table stood at the heart of the chamber, an old king's conceit wrought to a patient cruelty. A whole realm spread before a man's hands, every promontory and river valley, every town and treacherous shoal. A toy he might move with his forefinger if only the rest of the world would make way for the finger. Stannis Baratheon did not touch it. He stood with his hands behind his back, the knuckles showing white in the firelight, jaw set as if he would grind it to dust if the business before him did not yield. His black hair had thinned and receded until it made a widow's peak above the unlovely plane of his face. He had shaved that morning, and already a dark shadow lay on his cheeks and chin, stubborn as anything else about him. Melisandre of Asshai stood near the fire in her red silk, a warm-hearted inferno in human shape, her eyes as steady on Stannis' profile as the brazier was on coals. The ruby at her throat trembled with her breath and pulsed like a drop of living blood. Davos Seaworth, once a smuggler and now a knight, had kept his place in the doorway until the king noticed him. It was a hard art, being present but not intrusive where great men did their thinking. He judged it from the angle of shoulders and the way Stannis' mouth thinned when an interruption intruded. "My lord," Davos said, and knew his error as soon as his tongue betrayed him. "Your grace," said Stannis, not looking round. "Your grace," Davos said, dipping his head. He still had the old stump ache where the lord, that is, the king, had taken his cure for past crimes. His little pouch of finger bones knocked with their familiar comfort against his breastbone when he breathed. Salladhor Saan was already there, reclining with feline ease in a dragon-carved chair that had never known such a posture. The Lyseni wore cloth of silver and an indigo sash, a gold hoop in one ear and rings enough to pay a crossbowman's wages for a winter. His mustache was trimmed like a princeling's, and his smile, when it came, was all pleasant disbelief at Westerosi faults. "Ah, the Onion Knight!" he exclaimed subtly, as if they shared a joke Davos had not yet heard. "We were talking of honest trade." "Piracy," Stannis said. Saan put his hand to his heart. "The word bites, your grace, and yet some bites are sweet." He gestured at the painted sea with a jeweled hand. "You have an enemy in there. I have ships. You have profit in your head," Stannis said, and the faintest curl of disdain was in the word profit. "It is not the same thing." They had talked it nearly to death by the time the bells in Dragonmont's shadow tolled for midday. Stannis paced twice around the painted table, stopping over and again with his thumbs digging into the riverlands or the crownlands. Melisandre watched the movement as if it were liturgy. "If you can close the gullet," Stannis said for what must have been the 5th time, looking at Saan but speaking at the table as if it would finally answer him, "you can starve the city. Tyrion Lannister cannot eat wildfire. Ser Jacelyn cannot hold Flea Bottom with oaths. I have letters to all the lords of the realm. The truth is a blunt instrument in a world of meat mallets," Saan finished, good-natured. "I know the gullet better than any man living, your grace. I have sailed it in fog and in winter ice. But to set a net across it for months, that is not a day's work. And the king will not pay me in boatloads of righteousness. The men of Lys eat and drink like other men, yes? And they like women," he added, grinning. "Like any poor sinner. You will be paid," Stannis said, curt. "Gold is not lacking." He did not look at Melisandre, though Davos knew as a man knows his own hands that gold was lacking and would be more so before any summer came again. "Take Driftmark's galleys. Lord Valerion is my man. Use your own ships and his. No ship in or out. I want the mouth stopped as tight as a nun's vows." Melisandre's voice, when it came, was thick velvet over iron. "The boy king will starve on sweets turned to ash in his mouth. The Lord of Light has shown me a dark tide whose crest is made of crows. Those who deny you will eat their dead, and their cries will rise like smoke." Stannis' jaw flexed. "I am no reaver," he said. "Starve the Lannisters of wine and the small council of trade. stop the crown's galleys from sortying. But if you cut the throats of fishermen and sink poor cogs, I will feed you to your own crew." San adopted a crestfallen melancholy that fooled no one. "I am not so cruel, your grace. I have a tender heart. I leave cruelty to true kings." Then he laughed his silver chime of laughter that made Davos want to find a quiet room and scrape it out of his ear. When he left the stone drum, Davos trailed the pirate down to the gull-whipped causeway where the sea spray salted their boots. Ships pricked the horizon like needles, their sails shivering ribbons of gray. Salladhor paused to adjust his gloves, as if he were a lord about to present himself to a queen. "Sir Onion," he said, friendly as a familiar devil. "You told the king once that you would smuggle the moon into his hand if he bid you. Did you mean it?" "I said no such nonsense," Davos said. "I told him I'd smuggle onions until my bones were salt." San clicked his tongue. "Ah, my memory plays me jokes. Will you watch from the walls while I take little bites of the boy king?" "I will sail with you." The words rose up of their own accord. "If this is to be done in the king's name, let me keep you honest." San's smile twitched. "Honest pirates are like clean gutters. They are a contradiction that makes rain loud." "Jage, come. We will make no old stories new, but we may make new stories old. I will be glad of your candle when the night grows thick." The night grew thick across the first fortnight, a gauze of sea mist and smoke from damp-fired pitch drifting up from the beacons on Driftmark and the little watchtower on the Scorched Sister. Salladhor San's galleys took their places as if they had always been meant for it. Sleek, shallow-drafted vessels with bronze rams and crews of brown-skinned, black-haired men whose songs did not laugh so much as lilt. Lord Montford Valerion's own ships, proud and white-sailed with the seahorse snapping in the wind, made the line look like law instead of appetite, and that seemed to sit smoother in Davos's chest. From the decks of the Valyrian, Salladhor's beloved monster with oars like a centipede's legs and a foredeck heavy with scorpions, the Gullet looked like a blade point pressed between isles. To the west was Blackwater Bay, a dull bottle of water stoppered by the city and its low brown smoke. To the east, the narrow sea went away forever. Men said there were cities on the far side with perfume in the gutters and girls who smelled of oranges, but most of the men who said it had never passed even as far as Tarth. The Gullet had currents that ran crosswise and moontides that piled up invisible walls, and the wind went capricious in its throat. A blockade here, to last, needed eyes, patience, and hard habits. They took the first ship on the third day of the net. She was a gull-brown cog out of Mere with a painted lady on her prow and tarry patches on her side. She came in with the sunrise behind her, bold as you please. They ran alongside and tossed grapnels, and the Valyrian's high deck vomited men down upon her like olives out of a jar. On the deck, among barrels of fustian cloth and rose-scented oil, a Myrish captain protested in a language that had more hands than words. Salladhor soothed him with smiles and a promise of receipts. Davos found a ledger. The cargo was bound for King's Landing, the man said. The receipt would be honored by the king. Which king? Davos asked jury. The captain shrugged as if kings were weather. San made it a show. The merman was paid, less than his goods were worth, and the cog was turned back with a freshly painted stag and flaming heart flapping at her stern. San's men on 3 galleys took her eastward escort and divided it between themselves, and their cheer was loud but not obscene. They could be civilized thieves when someone watched them. The 4th ship they took was not so civilized. Fishermen out of Cracklaw Point had laid their nets in the bay and come too far east when a capricious wind frog-jumped their sails. They were hard-faced men with muddy hands and children in the bottom of their boats. San waved his rings and declared a tax. The men cursed but handed up copper pennies, then asked if they might pass while the oarsman grinned at a girl with a knot of hair tied up with string, her teeth like little oysters in her head. Davos stood on the Valyrian's prow and frowned until the ogling went still. "Our master is not a reaver," he told San later, in the cramped steersman's alcove that smelled of smoke and garlic. "And I won't have small folk bled for sport in his name." "You wound me. Sport? Never." San's smile never altered. "If I had wanted sport, I would have set a dancing bear on your decks and told it men's hearts are honeycombs. But I bow to monks, Sir Onion. Without your conscience, where would my soul hide? We will dine on cogs and carracks instead." He tilted his head. "But every blockade is made of bones. Remember that. The bones must be someone's." Tyrion Lannister found the bones quick enough. The smell of the city changed before the sound did. Meat gone sweet turned the alleys sour, and old wood in the quays began to creak with a different rhythm, older, complaining. He came through the King's Gate wrapped up in fur, riding a shaggy mount that looked as out of place as anything he himself had ever worn, and the bells on the September of Baelor tolled as if the city were a beehive that had been struck. He made the council chamber his first stop and found Cersei there with her cup to her lips and a smile that did not reach her eyes. "You could have sent a raven," she said when the pleasantries were done. "We have been treated to the spectacle of our harbor like a plate that someone has eaten from and not washed. It was delightful. Father will be overjoyed. Father would be overjoyed if you learned to say please." Tyrion's mind ran ahead of his mouth as it usually did. He asked for the harbor tally and got a stack of paper that stank of nothing so much as fear. The guilds had stopped meeting twice a week because there was nothing to talk about that did not end in an empty purse and curses. The Alchemists' Guild was cheerful enough with their little jars and big promises. Halene the Pyromancer spoke glowingly of how wildfire could be used to keep the bay clear of enemies and sometimes of friends. The city's princes of wheat were glum. The Butchers' Guild sent polite notes and boys with sad eyes and thin wrists to say, there was less meat. There would be less. Close all taverns after the 7th bell except those with licenses, Tyrion told Bronn with quill scratching. No more pies on street corners. If the small folk are to fight, let them fight the smell. Send the gold cloaks to the bakers and count their flour casks. Ser Jacelyn, he added to the commander of the city watch, make certain every bag isn't cut while you look the other way. I'll put trustworthy men, Jacelyn said, stiff. In King's Landing? Tyrion raised an eyebrow. You must breed them in your cellars, then. I'll want to look at that. Varys cooed from a corner where the light made his bald head a pearl. I have friends on the water, my lord Hand. On both sides of the water. His soft hands fluttered. The pirate is as pirate does. He would make a bargain if he were offered a bargain that did not stink. The trouble is that most bargains stink. I am not accusing you, he added and smiled mother-bright. Find me the price that doesn't stink, Tyrion said. When Varys made that little flourish of his fingers that meant you already wished to be grateful, he added, and find me a bowman who can shoot straight in a stiff wind. He sent ravens to Rosby, to Stokeworth, to Duskendale, and further north to Maidenpool. He made talk with lords who peered at him as if he were a show dog that performed parlor tricks and demanded a seat at table. He set the row of smithies along the Street of Steel to a new task and made it a secret as only the secrets of a city are secret, that is to say everyone knew and no one named it. A chain, then another chain, links as big as a man's waist with long pins to hold them, a necklace to clasp around the throat of the river itself. He visited the alchemists and breathed in a biting sweetness while Halene named numbers, all soft and odd. He visited the harbor as often as he could, just to look. It was empty like a church eavesdropped in the hours between prayers. Nets hung and dried, ropes spiraled like dead serpents. Pieces of white fishbone shone under the water like stars gone to rest. He felt a prickle down the back of his neck when he considered the other side of the gullet, an itch as if someone had his eye in a sling. Ser Mandon stood at his shoulder while they watched the sun spray its pennies on the chop. Shall we attempt to break them, my lord? Mandon asked in a voice like the scrape of sword on stone. We have ships. We have ships that will burn as well as theirs, Tyrion said. He had to crane his neck to look up at the bland face under the white hood and thought with a tiny hush of delight that if the world threw only such questions at him, he would live to be very old indeed in a city made of gold. Wait, we will break them, but not with our nose. There were quieter battles. The first bread riot was small enough that no one named it until it became memory and thus infamous. A baker set 24 loaves upon his sill to cool an onion square, and 24 became 18, became 10, became 3, and then the boys with hungry mothers in their eyes and quick hands in their sleeves pulled down the awning and the bread with it, and a big man, hammer in his belt and 3 days' stubble on his jaw, shouted that the king ate better than the streets, and the butcher answered that the king was a child and the two of them together could eat his body twice before sunset. The gold cloaks thumped them to ground and two more men rose. Women screamed near the well, and the water ran brown with the dust. Sansa Stark had the misfortune to be out that day, riding from the castle with the Queen and Joffrey and Sandor Clegane behind them like a black boundary wall. She saw the faces, colorless for want of meat. She heard a woman hiss, the hissing louder than the bees around the well, "Hiss you," and then a stone flew and then another. Joffrey laughed when they hit a dog, and Clegane was suddenly all iron and grating breath as he drove them back. A boy tried to seize the reins of Sansa's mare, and she looked into his eyes and saw her own fear inside them, and the mare jinked and she was almost down when the hound's burned hand caught her and hauled her upright. The rioters became a tide with a mind of its own, and the crush pressed until ribs creaked and pain became a color that the eyes could see. The bells tolled again and the day stank of panic. Word of demon worship at Dragonstone, of burning carved gods and black smoke from the sea, traveled faster than a ship's sail. Word of a pirate lord with rings on both hands and a taste for singing girls, who could stop a fleet with his laugh, traveled faster still. Men in King's Landing began to wear little crowns made of antlers beneath their hats and whisper that if only the man on Dragonstone were in the red, keep the city would not eat itself. Varys brought Tyrion a list of these antler men written on good parchment in a fair hand. "They are misguided," Varys said, almost apologetic. "But they are also dangerous for the danger they invite. Mercy may make a harvest of traitors." "I have mercy," Tyrion said, and felt his lip twist. "But it is not a harvest I mean to make." He had Varys bring him Salladhor son. The pirate came by night in a boat that skimmed like a scarf across the water. They met under the broken tooth of a forgotten pier where the tar had eaten the wood until only posts stood like blackened ribs. Bronn waited with men, bows strung and nocked. "Welcome to honest trade," Tyrion said as he made his bow. He had the chain in his head, each link a tiny crown. He had wildfire in jars waiting to be poured into different throats. He had a smile that was almost real. Salladhor made a courtier's flourish and kissed the air above Tyrion's knuckles. "Lord Imp," he purred, as if he praised a flavor. "I have never loved the king's law, but I love all kings who pay. Your rival has promised me much. He glowers when he does it. It is charming in its way. If I could glower the city into bread, I'd glower until my eyes fell in my lap," Tyrion said. "Instead, I have gold." He gestured to two chests. The boards creaked strangely in that damp. "Let 2 ships through. 3. Nothing grand, grain for Rosby's mills, flour for Duskendale to bake, some barrels for the street of flour. You'll be feeding the small folk. I'm sure there's some religion where that's favored. The Lord of Light finds soft hearts distasteful," Salladhor said amiably, "but he smiles on wealth. This is known in Lys. Is there a 3rd chest? What would be the price for Myrcella's safe passage?" Tyrion asked, making his voice idly conversational and keeping his eye on the bright little movements Salladhor's fingers made. "Ah," San said, as if the glass of his mind had tilted and caught a new image. "The princess is a sweet named coin, but a pirate who eats princesses grows fat, and then a king with a long knife visits him in his bed. Not tonight." He tapped a ring on the lid of a chest and hummed a bar of a tune. 2 ships. 3, if they sail with painted sails of bravos, and if your men in your high towers do not loose their foolish arrows in panic. That is my tender, Lord Imp." "You asked me for 3 chests," Tyrion said. "I bring 2, and you cut the price in my favor. Have your Lyseni thieves stolen your wits as well as your purse?" "Your voice is a coin," Salladhor answered lightly. "You spend it as if you had only the one. Be careful. Men who squander the sound of themselves end by hearing only their echo." He took the gold. 2 ships came in 3 days later with sails striped like candy and grain inside them like a secret. Fleabottom breathed again for 2 sleeps and then held its breath once more. Tyrion knew when the small cooking fires guttered on the edges of the city that the reprieve had ended. He ordered from the alchemists what he had not thought he would ask so soon. A little boat, lacquered and sweet as a toy, loaded with wildfire, to be set adrift to startle the pirates. The wind turned that night, cruel as a joking boy. The toy boat nosed the current, and then the current turned it. It kissed the red wine galley they had dragged from the long years of the city's neglect to make seemings of power, and the green kissed back and began to eat with a purr of delight. For 3 heartbeats the men watched in beauty. Then they moved. The sea glowed witch-bright. Helene screamed in joy and terror that week and did not stop for 2 days. From the Valyrians' larboard gallery, Davos watched their signal boat catch the drift of magic and flame into a flower that nobody sane should ever have been glad to see. The first picket galley, a lean Lyseni with a woman's name, got clear in time with her oars purling water like a harp. The second took fire at the braid of her stern rope and then her deck, and her men went over the side as if made of tin melted at a child's feast. Salladhor swore in 3 tongues and then smiled his little parlor smile again. "So the boy hand has a taste of cunning," he said. "It makes him likable." "Don't call it that," Davos said. "What would you have me call the kind of burning that does not catch the man who said it?" The pirate asked, amused. "Faith." The blockade tightened. Ships out of Gulltown and Crab all turned away at the first glimmering of a white-sailed Valerion on the horizon. The night watchtowers along the coast learned to read the flicker patterns of Valyrian lanterns. 1 for sighting, 2 for chasing, 3 if fire went loose on the water. House Celtigar's men on Claw Isle sent word of a bold king with a fiery heart. Then they sent word that their lord would do as the crown said. Then more private word that they were considering their options like wise men. Stannis ground his teeth. "I will grind Lord Celtigar when I have time to grind men not worth the grit," he told Davos, under the kind of tight-souled rage that Melisandre called zeal. The Red Woman lit fires and Stannis watched them. Davos could not say if he watched for meaning or for proof of absence. In the flames that licked at driftwood and oil, Melisandre saw things with soft certainty. "Green demons on water," she said one dawn. "The river is a throat that will swallow proud men and spit bones." She looked at Davos then with a half-smile that made his belly flinch. "You know what the Lord of Light requires to turn the world's face." "Not my son," Davos said before he could stop himself. It was not what she had said. He knew the shape over which her silences grazed. "Not yet," she said. Little birds that never set foot on water brought Tyrion word of a reach-drawn storm. Littlefinger had ridden south with hopes and lies arrayed like a peacock's tail, and come north again with a betrothal made of roses and money. The Tyrells would snare pride and gold both. The red wine fleet stirred. "Unpleasant," Tyrion told Cersei with his goblet heavy in his hand. "They will bring grain as well as soldiers." "If they arrive," Cersei said. Eyes narrowed to narrow golden cats in the candlelight. "If, choose smaller words if you mean to speak as if the outcome were decided. I prefer when your wit insults other people's fortunes." "Is that why you slit Pycelle?" Tyrion asked. "To keep his little beard from stirring when he breathed?" Her smile was not a smile. "You mistake me for a fool," she said, and finished her wine. He went to the ramparts beyond the mud gate when word reached that sails were smudges on the eastern horizon like finger marks on glass. The watch captain's horn had already blown twice. In the haze the Lyseni line altered, tightening between Dragonstone's black teeth and Driftmark's gentler chalk. From this distance, men were moving specks on a child's counting tablet. He watched the way they shifted and took in air through his teeth. "Bronn," he said, "send the little squadrons. Not the hulks. I still want to eat supper with you tonight." The red wine captains knew their business. Their ships were broad of beam and honest in their mathematics. For every 2 Lyseni, 3 arbor men. For every Valerian flag, a war galley out of the Mander with its ribbed belly full of men who had valor for breakfast and salt for tears. They came on with the assurance of men who had rehearsed their victory while lying abed. San did not meet them square. He would not, he was the clever kind of brave. He feinted east to pull them beyond the line of a shoal marked by a natural arch of rock that looked like a dragon that had fallen asleep mid-thought. He put his galleys into the cross-current as if into a dance step he had practiced more than once. He sprang a pair of fireships with tar thick as boiled blood and bundles of pitch tied under their decks. They lunged with the wind like dogs straining at a leash and burned 2 arbor galleys to the water with a crack and a roar, and the shy scream of green flame surfacing where the jars broke. Davos stood in the stern of a dragonstone galley with a name too old to be fashionable and shouted for the oarsmen to reverse when he saw the smoke begin to roll, thick and salted and fat as any cooking smell and twice the horror. He saw a man on the warship half a cable to port, a boy really hair the color of a coin under black, dive from a deck and strike the green. The first heartbeat he was a shape in it. The second there was nothing but the empty mouth of the sea. For the rest of his life, when Davos closed his eyes, he could still hear the sigh water makes when it swallows something alive. The battle lasted all day, and the wind veered at noon. The Redwynes, having lost their handsome surprised faces, put on sober ones and fought with discipline. Lord Montfort Valerion took a spear through the neck in the afternoon, and his white-sailed flagship floundered like a beast hamstrung. 3 Lyseni ships tried to take her off the field. One went home to the sea like a coin into a rich man's pocket. By dusk San had drawn his remaining line back into the Gullet's tightest throat, and the Redwyne admiral had the thought, which one could see travel into his ships like a small wave, that he might break them if he pressed. Then a fog crept down out of nowhere as if Melisandre had exhaled, and the sea became an old man's mirror, taking down the day's features and leaving only smears. Horns blew to no avail. The Redwynes were disciplined, but they were not fools. They fell back to deep water and shook themselves like dogs. They had run the blockade for 4 days with fast craft by the time they braved it again. Sackmeal and barley beer came into the city under arbor green and gold banners. The people at the gates cheered until their throats bled dry. A Septon cried that the mother had placed her hands upon the ships and then slipped on the innocent grain and broke his nose to the laughter of boys who found it easier to laugh than to cry. Cersei's cups brimmed red again, and she looked at Tyrion across the table with satisfaction that tasted like spite. "Praise Sir Littlefinger," she said, "and perhaps your pirate friend. I can live on wine indefinitely if the little rats can be made to squeak quieter." "They are people, sister," he said. "Little rats?" she repeated and smiled. Sansa knelt in the sept and whispered prayers that grew more fanciful the more the candles burned down. Simple things for the baker's daughter with the chipped tooth, for the washerwoman who had stroked her arm in Baylor Square and whispered courage, child, and then for things she could not even name except as warmth. Sometimes she would close her eyes and pretend the steadiness of the flame was the steadiness of her father's presence, and that when she opened them he might be standing where the light was. She thought of her little sister and the hills of home and of a dire wolf with eyes like winter. When she left the sept the air was gone sharp with pitch and new cordage. She looked east along the river's throat and saw the light scream and flicker as if a necklace writhed on a woman's pale neck. Once, across the water, she thought she saw something green catch and dance. The hound came out of shadow behind her and did not like the way she looked at it. "Come away," he said. His breath smelled of wine he had not enjoyed. "Go look at flowers. They will make you kinder." The second battle at the Gullet came fast and hot, and the sea remembered the taste of green. The Redwynes had learned. They sent in small tractable ships at dusk, and then a third of their fleet under covered decks in the dark, as if the dusk were nothing but evening's long fist. Tyrion sent his own small craft outkin to greet them, little boats with their bellies sloshing with liquid hell. The wind teased and mocked. The first 3 boats drifted into the crosstide and never found their marks. The fourth skipped along as if a child had set it on a rooster's back. It kissed the beam of a Lyseni and became a quiet sun. The quietness was what killed the heart. Sound came after. A fifth lit the water near the Valyrian, and the green lurched up and wanted to be a man and then a god. Salladhor swore and threw off his gold rings one by one as if they were lures for death. By dawn the blockade still held, but it was a gory grip. The Redwynes had not broken through in weight. They had sent in only enough muscle to bruise, and then they had fallen back. The city celebrated anyway because men are clever at celebrating what they want to believe. The antler men came out with their little horns and whispered their whisperings. Varys collected their names because that was a habit with him. Tyrion sent some to the wall and some to the grave and the rest to their wives in tears. He sat with his map and his chain and ran his front teeth along his thumbnail until the nail was a crescent like a tired moon. "He's not a fool," he told Bronn without looking up. "The pirate. He won't come up the river." "Then we'll go down the river to him," Bronn said lazily. "Or not, and the city will eat itself." "It already has," Tyrion said. "The trick is to teach it to stop just before it reaches its heart." Stannis had no patience for teaching. In the firelight, with the smell of salt always in the corners of the room, he listened while his captains told him what he had. He had more ships than any single lord in the Crownlands. He had Salladhor Saan and the promise of prayer, which he mistrusted. He had his own blunt certainty, which he trusted as a man trusts his right hand swallowing his left. He had Davos and the habit of being disappointed. "We held them," he said, and what in another man might have been pride sounded in him like the recital of a bill. "For now," Davos said, "they will come. Again. With the Tyrells. We can starve King's Landing, but we starve ourselves of time. The longer we wait, the greater their strength will grow." "Our strength grows too," Stannis said. "The lords begin to read and answer. They begin to say my name without making a face. They begin to fear hunger more," Davos said softly, and waited for the blow. It did not come. Stannis made a harsh, curious sound. "You think your small folk will love you if I feed them?" "I think they will live," Davos said. Melisandre's eyes were warm as hearthfire when they fell on him. "They will love you through fear of the darkness. The night is full of terrors, Lord Davos." "There is terror by day too," he said. The reach came like a great shirt that fit the country and warmed it. The Red Wine fleet bore down in weight and discipline. Behind them there were rumors of grain ships in a shining tail, of barges and boats and rich prizes. In the city they lit the torches on the walls, and Cersei put on a green gown and looked at her reflection with a smile so smooth it could have been ice. Joffrey ordered a new banner sewn with a crown as big as his chest. Tyrion counted in his head. The chain not yet finished, the pyromancers too drunk with their success to reckon caution. The coin gone to too many different pockets to clink upon its brothers without shame. Varys whispered that the Lord of Dragonstone had sent a small band ashore at Massey's Hook to harry the grain roads to Rosby. Davos led them. "He never rests," Tyrion said, and wished he had wine that had not been watered. The landing was a fog-slick affair of oars and oaths and men in leather with knives between their teeth, who knew the difference between the edge that killed men and the edge that frightened them. They took a store's barn at Stokeworth and burned it. Then another. They left money for what they could carry, scrawled in Davos's careful hand where no one would touch it. "King Stannis will repay what King Stannis has taken." Lord Davos Seaworth, and he found himself wishing he could spare the men's sons to read it. Bywater's patrols came up from the south, and they cut a path between them with the sea's cold staring over their shoulders. They came and went, and the grain trains failed to meet their schedule, and for a day Tyrion thought, no, for 2 days, that perhaps the chain would be finished. Imagine that. Before the great push, and then he saw the dark shape of the Red Wine line at dawn and knew that it would not be. The last day of the blockade looked like story. Dawn came up on a sea that had not chosen a mood yet, and the fleet was out there, bigger than any man could eat with his eyes at one sitting. Salladhor's men made the sign they made when they talked about luck. The Valerian men said prayers for reefs and for honest deaths. There was even a brown-robed priest of R'hllor on one Lyseni. His beard so thin you could see his chest through it when the wind had its way. The first horn sounded, then the second, and the water between the lines narrowed into a kind of throat that wanted to swallow bravery and spit out bones. Saan did not meet them square. He met them with wit. He spread his line and contracted it in time with the tide, as if the moon were a drum he had paid to play for him. He put Davos Seaworth and 3 Dragonstone galleys in the grinder's mouth, where he himself would not risk his gaudy ship. For an hour it seemed he might hold. Then a red wine galleass with oars like a splayed hand took the Valerian flank and crumpled it like a paper on a child's lap. Once a hole opens in a cloth, it tears faster than it was woven. The red wines rammed and backed water with a discipline that would have done credit to a prayer book. Piracy is cleverness and nerve and appetite. War is appetite sharpened on discipline. The blockade broke at last with a sound like a sigh. The city saw the sails like a change in the weather. Bells rang, then stopped ringing because men dropped their ropes when their hands shook. Tyrion stood on the quay until he could see the faces of the first sailors in the first grain ship, and then he let out the breath he had been not knowing he was holding. Bread. That night there were loaves as well as fights. A child with a piece of bread clutched like a bird against her chest laughed aloud. Sansa stood at a window and watched a fire in Flea Bottom that belonged to no army but to poor men's joy, and she put her forehead on the cool stone and said the prayers she had said before. Varys went very quiet. Cersei sang under her breath and touched the long green sleeve of her gown, or perhaps her own hair. The Hound drank until his hand shook and then did not drink at all. Stannis was iron in defeat as in victory, neither the better nor the worse. We held them as long as we needed, he said. Melisandre's eyes had cooled. The fires she lit did not show anything he wanted to say in public. Davos stood with salt dried on his beard and a stain of some other man's blood on the back of his knuckles and tried to unlearn the sight of the boy dissolving under green. He washed his hands for a time that would have seemed shameful if anyone had had the leisure to watch him. Now we go, Stannis said. They are fat with relief. They think themselves saved. We go and we take the city while they are still swallowing. He did not go up the river. Tyrion had set his chain like a patient bridegroom setting a necklace upon a reluctant neck. He had burned his hulks and taught himself to be a man who would light a sea. He had committed men and money and lies. He had planned to make the sea his ally in a way that kings forgot the sea could be. When Stannis' fleet came and did not come into the river's mouth, the chain lay there a silent cunning with no neck to bite. The battle that came to the mud gate was uglier than water. It was grinding wood and boiling oil, lighted vats of bright death that the alchemists flung with hands trembling at the we of their own power. It was ladders and black iron hooks reaching for stone, and hooks chopped off by axes in a rain of sparks. It was the Hound, who had seemed to Sansa something like the picture one drew of Menace when one was a child, feeling fire kiss the edge of his face and going back from it with a sound that she had never heard from any man, and then with a look she had never seen from him, deep and naked and wrong, turning his back on the burning gate and on the boy he'd sworn to protect. It was Jacelyn Bywater doing his duty and then falling with a look of annoyance on his face, as if death were a bad policy he meant to correct the moment he had time. It was Mandon Moore, pale as a stone's patient envy, pushing his blade where it ought not to be and meeting something he had not expected. It was Davos in a little boat near the shore, ferrying men to dark water steps while the siege towers with the stag and hart burned like great lanterns lit for a ghastly feast. He saw Stannis at the line where stairs turned to ramparts, grim as a grim prayer, sword in hand and shield up. He saw an antlerman, one of those poor fools who thought they could make a crown out of sticks, open a postern and then choke on it when a flood of men came through and swallowed him as a wave swallows a drift of foam. He saw, once, in a bright change of wind, Tyrion on the wall, small but loud as any bell. Then the banners came from the south, and with them a new shift in the light. Lannister crimson in one column, green with golden roses in another, the steel making a rain-like sound as men who had run all day struck the city by its wall and poured inward like a river. Stannis' men did not break. They bent. Then they bent again. The line had to give somewhere. It gave at last. Davos felt the change as he felt the turn of a tide under his feet. He dragged two men to a boat who would not thank him later because boy heroes do not like to think of being dragged. He hauled a third man and slipped and was under and came up with water in his sinuses sharp as needles. On the wall Tyrion smiled with blood down his face. Some of it was his, some someone else's. His dwarf's mind had known again the particular little joy of having placed a thing correctly, though not in the place he had first intended. He had held them. He had not destroyed them all on the river as he had dreamed, but he had held them. Tywin rode in under the gate of the gods with roses and had a face like ice broken cleanly with a hammer. Stannis was iron going back. He did not shatter, he rebounded. He went down to the shore with his men still around him and his colors ragged but not down. Salladhor San's ships were there like cats waiting to see if the dog might tire. He covered the retreat with muskets of wit and the Valyrians' big sweeps taking in men and letting out curses. Not all came out. Many did not. Davos sat on a bench and coughed up water for several long breaths and then looked around for his sons and found one. Then found another, and felt a hole in the world where two more should have been. He tied his hand in a knot in his shirt and pressed it to his finger bones until his ribs ached. He did not look at Melisandre, who stood at the stern, and the ruby at her throat was dark, as if it were an eye that had closed. The blockade became a thing that had been. The city ate again and slept as well as a city can sleep after war, which is to say, its dreams were loud and its waking thin. Sansa walked the ramparts in the evenings that were allowed to her and watched the lights on the water and the difference in them. Bread in the bakeries tasted like bread instead of fear. There were boys who practiced with wooden swords in alleys and bragged that they had seen a knight lift a man with a spear and the man explode into meat, as boys would. Tyrion sat in a high room and sipped wine he had not earned and grimaced when he tried to like it. The alchemist's jars were piled in their damp cellars like a future that had been partly exhausted and partly deferred. Varys purred and preened and cast his net of kindness as usual and collected whispers about antler men, who still made their finger crowns and would not be convinced by bread where they might be convinced by blood. Cersei had her son and her gown and her wine. Tywin had his ledger and his pride and the flavor of victory he preferred. Not wine, but water made clear by pulling a stone out of it. The Hound was gone. On Dragonstone the wind cut and the sea kept speaking whether men listened or not. Stannis stood before the painted table and did not touch it still. "We should have slit their throats at anchor," a Florent told him, gaunt as a moral and twice as spare. "We should have had men for a second line on the left," another said. "We should have sold our souls better," Salladhor said, lounging with his feet crossed and his boots cleaner than they had any right to be on a ship. "Your Grace should have given me 4 chests and the King in King's Landing should have given me 5. But I am not disappointed." He flicked a hand, rings chiming. "I have women to visit in Duskendale, and jewels to buy for them. The sea will still be here when I return. Perhaps even the war." "You will leave," Stannis said. He took it without rancor, which was as close to magnanimity as he ever got. "For a time," San admitted. "A short time. Lys is a jealous wife, and when she calls me, I go. But I am not done with you. Your Grace is an entertaining gambler. A pirate enjoys a good gamble when he can afford to lose. The city is fed, yes. But the men who feed it now are not men who love the Boy King. They are men who love their bargain. You will pay for what you took?" Stannis told Davos later when they were alone, as if continuing a conversation that had not yet opened. "Those chests you left in the barns. You will have their names. You will not cheat them." "I would not," Davos said. For a moment yes. A boy vanish into green again. Then he shut his eyes and saw only darkness. "I left them my name," he said. Stannis made a short, sharp sound that might have been a thing like sympathy. "You left them mine too. It is well. We will ask again and eat what we are given. We will make another war that is not the same as the last. We will not sail up that river at a boy's command to be burned by green demons. Not now, not ever." He finally put his hand on the painted table. His fingers curled like a man's around a blade. The world moved on as it must. Old men of the sea told stories of a time when a pirate choked a passage until a kingdom choked with it. They told stories of green fire and of an iron king who would not break when bent. They told stories of an imp who was a dragon with its wings made of tricks. They told a story of a knight who had been a smuggler and kept the habit of paying his debts when no one asked it of him. New boys blew little horns made of sticks and called themselves kings in damp alleys, and were cuffed home by hungry fathers whose bellies had been full when the red wine sailed into the bay. In the silence that came after war, the sea breathed and hissed beneath Dragonstone. The wind found old cracks in old stone and spoke through them with old voices. The stars leaned close, pretend indifferent. Melisandre sat with her eyes half closed and watched a kind of fire that was not made with wood. The ruby at her throat pulsed with a patient beat. In King's Landing, the chain lay where it lay, a heavy serpent sleeping on the river's bed, its head and tail both fastened now for pride if not for need. Tyrion went to look at it once when night was empty of new alarms and stood with his hands on the cold stone of the parapet and listened to the Blackwater's endless talk. "You were to be a cleverer toy than you were," he told it. "But even dull knives cut. He wondered if one day he might have to pull it up and sell the iron link by link to make some other terrible plan that fed a city but starved his conscience, and decided that was a thought for a worse day than his worst. Salladhor-san left and came back as he pleased, stars and women governing him in equal measure. When he returned, he found that the gossip had ripened into fable. He accepted it with good appetite. He sailed the Gullet again and again because sailors are in love with repetition. The world changes and the sea says, "Do it once more, for me." He and Davos leaned together sometimes on the Valyrian's prow in the dark. They did not always speak. Davos kept his finger bones in their bag and his counsel with himself. The memory of boys vanishing into green water did not ease. It turned into something like bone, there when the flesh had tired. Stannis brooded and then acted as he saw his duty. The war did not end. It folded itself and unfolded itself around the hinge of the Gullet, as if the sea had made men its little toys and was tired of their old games and pleased by the new. Bread lines grew shorter in the city and then longer again. Bells tolled sometimes for victories and sometimes for weddings and sometimes for the dead. Sansa learned the faces of different kinds of fear as one learns the different of a harvest. Blight, rot, and a good year that comes and goes before one is ready. She watched the river with a stillness that had not been given to her in Winterfell. She watched the sails come and go as if they were the hands of a clock that could be trusted, and she knew better than to trust any clock. When she prayed, she did not ask for stories to be put back the way they were. She asked for bread and quiet and a chance to say goodbyes. In the Red Keep, men and women counted jars of wildfire and bushels of barley and pieces of information as if they were just different colors of coins. On Dragonstone, Stannis stood with his hand on a painted table and Melisandre whispered liturgies about light that swallowed day and night both. Davos walked the windy walls and felt the bag of bones knock his chest and asked the wind to let some sins rest. The wind did as wind does, which is to say what it wants. A year from the day the blockade began, men still told the story of it freely in the corners of wine shops and at the bows of ships, in the stone drum and outside the mud gate. The story shaped itself to the teller's mouth and to the ears that heard it. It was a story about hunger and about the arrogance of a city and the patience of a sea. It was about a king who would not be put off by his own sense of defeat and about a pirate who made himself as necessary as a lie. It was about a boy who saved a girl in a street riot and wished he had never learned that he could be afraid, and about a girl who learned patience like a language. It was about a small man whose plans seemed always to be the right size after all. It was about the way the Gullet proved that no throat can be closed forever, and that even when a man puts his hands around another man's neck, the world finds a way between their fingers and breath comes, ragged and enough. It was about green fire and black ships and bread. It was about how the sea teaches. Not gently, not cruelly, but with the eternity of waves that say over and over, and now and now and now again.